When the business of this House was suspended at 1:30 p.m., we had resolutions. Are there any further resolutions? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Long Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing me. I rise to move the motion for the following resolution. Recognizing that the World Health Organization observed World Mental Health Day on October 10th, and that mental health conditions account for 16% of the global burden of disease and injury in people aged 10 to 19 years. Globally, depression is one of the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. Whereas, the World Health Organization notes that half of all mental health conditions are revealed by 14 years of age, but most cases are undetected and untreated. The WHO cites the consequences of not addressing adolescent mental health conditions extending to adulthood, impairing both physical and mental health well-being, and limiting opportunities to lead fulfilling lives as adults. Whereas depression is defined as a mood disorder characterized by prolonged feelings of sadness and loss of interest in daily activities. The WHO states that depression is mainly characterized by a loss of energy, a change in appetite, sleeping more or less, anxiety, reduced concentration, indecisiveness, restlessness, feelings of worthlessness, guilt, or hopelessness, and thoughts of self-harm or suicide. And whereas online activities and social media can provide an unprecedented level of anonymity, thereby resulting in scores of young people suffering under the stigma of declining mental health largely in silence. The need exists to promote and integrate mental health into primary care settings and normalize the experience of mental illness as another health concern. Be it resolved that removing the stigma from mental illness is one of the first steps toward the prevention of widespread, undetected, and untreated mental illness in young people. Open discussions in fora, such as this National Youth Parliament, go a long way in shedding light on the need for increased education on the subject of mental illness and can provide avenues for further intervention. The members here assembled will discuss solutions for eradicating that stigma of mental illness on a national level by 1, promoting education and awareness of the various mental illnesses affecting young people. 2, advancing school-based interventions through teaching and training. And 3, introducing community-based prevention programs targeted at vulnerable young people. Be it further resolved that in 2017, the World Health Organization published the Global Accelerated Action for the Health of Adolescents, which aims to assist governments in responding to the health of adolescents in their countries, including mental health, and that this National Youth Parliament will provide a response to this document and identify policies, programs, and plans which ought to be undertaken by the government of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, words cannot express how I am most delighted to rise in this illustrious assembly to serve as a voice for the humble and distinguished constituents of my great Long Island. Depression, anxiety, and social isolation, Mr. Speaker, are not signs of weakness. They are signs for trying to remain strong for far too long with far too little help. From mothers struggling with postnatal depression, young people in schools who are being bullied, people facing stress and anxiety in the workplace, to some of our ethnic minority communities who face a higher incidence of stressful conditions. Mental illness is a cradle-to-grave problem, Mr. Speaker, with nothing like a cradle-to-grave service. Mr. Speaker, there may be some people who say that mental health is a kind of subject we can talk in the good times and not when the economy is such a priority. In my view, that is the opposite of the truth, because mental health is an economic challenge holding back prosperity. Because however hard the economic challenges in our country are, we cannot forget about the quality of people's lives. And finally, if we want a politics that talks directly to the challenges that Bahamian people face in their everyday lives, we cannot allow a silence to continue. And Mr. Speaker, it is not just politics that is too silent. It is a stigma and taboo running across our society which infects both our culture and the minds of young people. It is a taboo which not only blights the lives of many teens and other people, but also puts a severe strain on the initiation of solutions to aid these affected. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, education is the first stepping stone in every process in this country. And for this pressing issue, it is also. There are many mental illnesses that occur amongst the youth of today which need to be made aware to the Bahamian people. Too long, Mr. Speaker, have Bahamians played a blind eye to this issue, which will slowly but surely drag the Bahamas into an abyss of defeat and danger. To educate Bahamians, a long and detailed list of these mental health problems, their definitions and solutions need to be provided to the public in order for them to fully comprehend the severity of this issue. Public service announcements need to be made. This conversation needs to be a priority on talk and radio shows. Mr. Speaker, to engage with the public and inform them on everything pertaining with mental illness. Another solution may be simply having a talk or radio show solely serving the purpose of dealing with mental illness, giving daily motivation or on-the-go coping mechanisms. Mr. Speaker, it is quite shocking and a hurt to my young heart to provide you with the following information, that in my own hometown, Long Island, there is not even a single licensed practicing psychologist, therapist, psychiatrist, nothing of the sort. And possibly this occurs throughout other family islands as well. How do these people then deal with their mental problems? Yet another set of expenses to travel to Nassau? This should not be so. Mr. Speaker, I urge the public to get involved with this topic. Many lives can be helped or saved by implementing programs in communities to aid these youth who are vulnerable. To duplicate youth empowerment programs like Big Brother, Big Sister, the Bahamas Youth Network, and many more, which are used as guides and role models for youth of today, organizations need to be initiated where the main focus is mental illness. In such organizations, groups of teens can gather and engage in coping activities and discussions. Mr. Speaker, mental illness is a severe cross-cutting issue. Not as many Bahamian churchgoers would say, that child got demons. And it is not a phase that many Bahamian households assume children will just, and I quote, get over and grow out of. No, it is not. These closed-minded fallacies of my Bahamian people need to change in order to eradicate this stigma surrounding mental health. Mr. Speaker, as I bring my speech to an end, let it be said that if just one troubled child's life is saved from a life suffering of mental illness or a life filled with torment and anguish, then we, as youth parliamentarians, would have accomplished our goal by putting forward our agendas for this government. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have the unenviable responsibility of trying to solve an issue that we cannot see or touch, but one that we can certainly feel. Mr. Speaker, we don't talk about anxiety as an illness in these parts. We don't frequently talk about lasting feelings of worthlessness as anything other than a sour mood. Mr. Speaker, I suggest on behalf of the 4,004 voters in Freetown that we begin by recognizing this resolution's importance through our contributions. So, Mr. Speaker, while the spotlight is on myself and my community today, I want to use this time to highlight a former classmate of mine who is pursuing an advanced degree in psychology. I questioned my colleague, Mr. Speaker, on what she planned to do in the Bahamas after her training, but I was shocked by what she told me. She informed me, Mr. Speaker, that currently there is no master's program in the Bahamas for psychology, an absence that complicates the pathway to licensing for Bahamians, and she explained further that while there are multiple levels of mental health professionals in other countries, the only level that exists in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, can only be obtained through two equally frustrating ways. She can either, Mr. Speaker, sit through 5 years of internship after a master's degree that she can't even get in the Bahamas, or she can pursue a lengthy and very likely expensive PhD program for another 5 to 7 years. Mr. Speaker, it appears that the lack of advanced degrees in the Bahamas within the field of psychology is a serious impediment to any Bahamian wishing to effect professional change in their country. Who knows how many would-be influential guidance counselors and therapists we've already lost? Let's not forget, Mr. Speaker, however, that we have the task of changing political and social attitudes on this important issue. From my observation, it appears that outwardly acknowledging an issue that one cannot physically fix is frowned upon and deemed inconsistent with what it means to be a Bahamian. And that is particularly true for young Bahamian males. Mr. Speaker, point 82 of the Mental Health Action Plan 2013 to 2020 as published by the United Nations reads, currently, the research imbalance whereby most research is conducted in and by high-income countries needs to be corrected in order to ensure that low-income and middle-income countries have culturally appropriate and cost-effective strategies to respond to mental health needs and priorities. Mr. Speaker, let me underscore this. It is not sufficient to copy and paste the words of the WHO, the UN, or any other international body with policy recommendations. Rather, Mr. Speaker, we should use a context-sensitive approach to maximize effectiveness. Moreover, we must eventually get to the point, Mr. Speaker, where being Bahamian and asking for psychiatric and emotional help are not mutually exclusive. Freetown's recommendation, therefore, is to leverage our national broadcasting infrastructure and create a multimedia marketing campaign that would take inspiration from the United Nations internationally adapted effort, which, Mr. Speaker, centered around the use of the hashtag Let's Talk. Many of us in this House, Mr. Speaker, perhaps even yourself, grew up on Sesame Street. For some of our parents, Mr. Rogers was the friendly face of the neighborhood. Mr. Speaker, these programs were not just morning entertainment for some generations. It was their moral foundation. Keep this in mind, Mr. Speaker, when I say that I believe government would be ill-advised to leave the installation of a healthy social culture solely up to time or outside influences. If there's any doubt, Mr. Speaker, that my approach can work, just listen to some of the findings on government-sponsored mass media campaigns, as researched by Professors Melanie Wakefield, Barbara Loken, and Robert C. Hornick in 2010. As a part of their recommendations for policy, they wrote that mass media campaigns should be included as key components of comprehensive approaches to improving population health behavior. Mr. Speaker, sufficient funding, they continued, must be secured to enable frequent and widespread exposure to campaign messages continuously over time. The Mental Health Action Plan, Mr. Speaker, 2013 to 2020, brands government as the ultimate guardian of a population's mental health. The document continues to say, Mr. Speaker, that governments have the lead responsibility to put in place appropriate institutional, legal, financing, and service arrangements to ensure that needs are met and the mental health of the whole population is taken into consideration. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we need the government to recognize our mental health like they recognize physical health and enshrine care for both into universal health care options. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned in my first contribution today that at my day job I'm a graphic designer. But I mentioned this again specifically right now to underscore a very important point and something that I think many of our politicians are afraid to say today. I am thoroughly unqualified, Mr. Speaker, to be a policymaker regarding mental illnesses. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that a true mental health action plan for the Bahamas should not be crafted by yet another politician, but with and by Bahamians in the field, with the humble consideration of what other countries in the world are doing as well. And as I close, Mr. Speaker, I believe that our government doesn't always need to reinvent the wheel, but instead, we do, Mr. Speaker, need to get behind the wheel and drive this country to a place of greater tolerance on this issue. This debate is a great opportunity to do that. Albert Schweitzer said once that there are three important ways to lead people: by example, and third, by example. So for this discussion, I look forward to my fellow parliamentarians leading by example. Thank you.
It has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Recognizing that World Health Organization observed World Mental Health Day on October 10th, and that mental health conditions account for 16% of the global burden of disease and injury in people aged 10 to 19 years. Globally, depression is one of the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. Be it resolved that removing the stigma from mental illness is one of the first steps toward the prevention of widespread, undetected, and untreated mental illness in young people. Open discussions in fora such as this National Youth Parliament go a long way in shedding light on the need for increased education on the subject of mental illness, and it can provide avenues for further intervention. The members here assembled will discuss solutions for eradicating the stigma of mental illness on a national level by promoting education and awareness of the various mental illnesses affecting young people, advancing school-based interventions through teaching and training, and introducing community-based prevention programs targeted at vulnerable young people. Be it further resolved that in 2017, the WHO published Global Accelerated Action for the Health of Adolescents, which aims to assist governments in responding to the health needs of adolescents in countries, including mental health, and that this National Youth Parliament will provide a response to this document, identify policies, programs, and plans which ought to be undertaken by the government of the Bahamas. As many, Chair recognizes the member for Andros and the Berry Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the progressive, industrious, and hard-working people of North Andros and the Berry Islands, who overwhelmingly selected me to represent them in this honorable house. I rise to lend my support to the resolution, be it resolved, that removing the stigma from mental illness is one of the first steps toward the prevention of widespread, undetected, and untreated mental illness in young people. The people sent me here to speak on their behalf, and that I will do. Mr. Speaker, one may ask the question, what is mental illness? Mental illnesses are diseases or conditions that affect how you think, feel, act, or relate to other people or to your surroundings. According to the Department of Statistics, 1 in 4 people in the Bahamas are suffering from mental illness. But instead of us doing what it takes to assist these individuals, we laugh, and to us it is all a big joke. In 2018, it is time for us to step up our game. Countries like the United States and Canada, who we seem to pattern everything after, have implemented so many intervention strategies and programs to assist these persons. I ask the question, why are we so far behind? Are we not our brother's keeper, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 1 in 5 young people in the world are affected by mental health conditions, whether it be depression, anxiety, anorexia, etc. However, although millions of adolescents globally face issues with mental health, stigma remains a huge barrier to people receiving the care and attention they need. Mr. Speaker, I stand in this honorable house today to say that the stigma must end. Mr. Speaker, this is no laughing matter. This is serious business. Mr. Speaker, stigma can pervade the lives of people with mental health problems in many different ways. According to Corrigan, it diminishes self-esteem and robs people of social opportunities. This can include being denied opportunities such as employment or accommodation because of their illness. Yes, Mr. Speaker, businesses must be held accountable for contributing to the stigma by firing mentally ill persons and in most cases, not even hiring them. This is a shame and disgrace. But today, I am happy to see that we are beginning to address this problem. One way we can do this, Mr. Speaker, is if the government implements a policy to protect mentally ill persons from discrimination in the workplace, which will prevent them from being mistreated or fired. Another way, Mr. Speaker, is by way of community-based programs. Outlined in the Global Accelerated Act are programs and policies that can be adopted by the government of the Bahamas to assist adolescents' mental health. I firmly believe that if the Ministry of Health were to collaborate with the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture to develop a community-based youth program, both ministries would be able to educate the country on mental illnesses affecting the youth, ultimately removing the stigma and therefore allowing young people freedom to be diagnosed and receive treatment. Trained professionals as well as young persons diagnosed with a mental illness can be a part of the organization as well as the presentations to ensure that the youth fully understand that mental illness is indeed an actual issue and not a demonic possession. However, Mr. Speaker, this program would not be for the New Providence and Grand Bahama constituencies alone. The involvement of the outer islands is essential as we all make up the Bahamas. We cannot forget our family islands, Mr. Speaker. These recommendations are a step in the right direction of eradicating the stigma of mental illness. The change that we seek, it starts in us and with us. The old adage admonishes us to treat others the way we would like to be treated. If we all remember that, then North Andros and the Berry Islands, Exuma and the Ragged Islands, Auckland, the Bahamas at large, and the world would be a better place. Mr. Speaker, North Andros and the Berry Islands support this resolution.
As many, Chair recognizes the honourable member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The stigma surrounding mental health is one that has been left addressed for far too long. And we are feeling the repercussions of this daily, as each day the rates of young persons suffering from mental illnesses increases. Like a dark cloud that has settled upon this Bahama land and continues to plague this country daily, mental illness is growing like a vine and choking us constantly. According to the World Health Organization, each day approximately 3,000 adolescents die from preventable diseases. One of the leading causes of death being complications associated with mental health. In the Bahamian society, discussions about mental illnesses is almost taboo. And as a result, we have a lot of persons walking around with misconceptions about what is mental illnesses, and many persons walking around in silent suffering. Why? Because they're scared of being judged by society. According to American Psychiatric Association, mental illness can be defined as a health condition involving the changes in the emotion, thinking, or behavior of an individual. One of the most common forms of mental illnesses recognized in society is depression. This is perhaps one of the leading causes of illnesses and disabilities amongst adolescents. Mr. Speaker, as the great representative of the Elizabeth constituency, I will put forward possible solutions to this ongoing problem. Adolescents make up approximately 1/6 of the global population. In the year 2015, 1.2 million adolescents died from preventable diseases globally. Adolescents represent a pivotal sector of any society. Represents a pivotal sector of any society. These are the individuals that will grow to further develop the nation and to ensure its growth. If we as a government don't try to put infrastructures in place to protect the sector, what future can we say is left for any Bahamian society? Like a child learning how to ride a bike, the first thing we must do as a government is to educate the Bahamian people on mental health. This is not something that could be accomplished through a few commercials and light seminars held throughout the country. Our first step in educating the Bahamian people will be to tackle the ongoing stigma surrounding mental illness. Due to the influence of movies, music, and various media outlets, we have seen the way how persons suffering from mental illnesses are portrayed as crazy, violent, or in some ancient times, demons. But how can we form these misconceptions without attempting to assess these problems? As a result, there are persons suffering silently because of their fear of not being accepted or seen as crazy. Mr. Speaker, we must also accept the fact that no age is too young to suffer from mental health. We must create more youth-friendly materials that will teach the children about mental health, while also providing assistance for those who may be suffering. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, I would like to call for the addition of mental health assessments into the school systems. With this, we will be able to closely monitor students who may be at risk and also those who may be suffering silently. Studies have shown that by educating the public about mental illnesses and helping them gain an understanding, they are least likely to support stigma and discrimination. the implementation of psychiatry hotlines as well as community centers in areas where there are at-risk youth are also said to be more essential in combating this never-ending fight. Mr. Speaker, it is no big secret that mental illness is an issue that is spreading quickly through the world like a wildfire covering anything in its path. It is time for us to decide whether we are going to stand still and allow it to consume us, or whether or not we are going to stand up and take back what is ours. Mr. Speaker, I stand tall with all my constituents in Elizabeth when I say discrimination, no more. Stigma, no more. Enough laws, no more. We, the people of this great constituency, accept the resolution as is.
Honorable members, the chair wishes to acknowledge the presence of a very distinguished guest, the Honorable Lanisha Roll, Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, who has taken time out of her busy and most valuable schedule to grace us with her presence. We are honored by your presence. I would also like to recognize the presence of another member of Parliament and former youth parliamentarian, the Honorable Travis Robinson. Your appearances are much appreciated. As many, the chair wishes to recognize the member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, on September 17, 2018, the Grand Bahamian community and the entire country were devastated to learn of the alleged suicide of a well-known woman who made significant contributions to our country's youth. The questions that linger today are why? Why would a successful, healthy, and contributing individual see the need to end her own life? Why didn't people see the signs? Is it that we do not care, or that we just don't know how to identify the symptoms of mental illnesses? I strongly believe the latter to be the case. Over the years, the Bahamas has seen an increase in suicide cases, many of which could have been prevented if only people knew how to identify the signs of mental illnesses. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, defines mental illness as diseases of the mind ranging from mild to severe disturbances in thought and or behavior resulting in an inability to cope with life's demands and routines. Mr. Speaker, schools are environments where mental illnesses can go undetected and untreated. But Carhill, Wynn, and others share the view that when schools approach the topic, it supports all pupils, including those who are struggling with mental health themselves. Integrating mental health into the school curriculum can break the stigma associated with mental illnesses and increase understanding and awareness among students. Teachers should have basic mental health knowledge and learn the symptoms and signs of mental illnesses, which varies from anxiety attacks to schizophrenia. Teachers can also be taught how to create a safe and secure environment and be encouraged to have good relationship with their students. When teachers and students discuss mental health, all students will build their understanding on the subject and realize the freedom that comes from really and openly discussing a personal health concern that is really common. As a student, I feel positive and a sense of confidence when I have a good relationship with my teachers and I know they understand what I am going through. I am sure more of my peers who stand in this honorable establishment would feel the same. Mr. Speaker, by introducing prevention and protection programs that educate and bring awareness to community members about mental illnesses, the community will be more understanding and sympathetic to the victims of this disease. Likewise, the home and the community are also places where mental illnesses can go untreated. Bringing awareness about these type of illnesses in these two places can be the key to addressing the issues on mental health. The media, social media platform, trained professional and peer groups can be used to distribute information on symptoms and managing tips, as well as collecting information on mental health awareness in the communities. Honorable Speaker, students can and are benefiting from quality programs such as the Royal Bahamas Defense Force Rangers that foster practices and hold fast to models that work against mental illnesses. Discipline, dedication, determination. As a member of this prestigious club, I got rid of anxiety and gained confidence from key exercises such as man overboard, where I had to jump off a dock and link up with my peers below whose instructions were to leave no man behind. Other youth programs like Urban Renewal cater to youth, giving them hope that they don't have to live in despair, opportunities to socialize and be part of peer groups. Dr. Dwayne Sands noted in his speech at the World Health Mental Day Symposium 2018, it is necessary to use forums to promote good mental health throughout every stage of life. Mental illnesses information is usually spread by professionals of the healthcare system. But today, I applaud the government of the Bahamas who have brought youth together to discuss this crucial issue. When youth talk about mental illnesses, their peers will listen. Instead of ostracizing them for not being normal, they will be more accepting and tolerant when they encounter those who suffer from mental illnesses. In conclusion, together we can foster the understanding that good mental health and well-being is important through every stage of life and for everyone. Thank you.
As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Maikar.
Mr. Speaker, I stand before you once again, humble and honored to be representing the phenomenal Maikar constituency. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pride that I use my voice to be the voice of change, not only for the youth of the Bahamas, but also for the overlooked youth with a mental illness. Mr. Speaker, you cannot recover from anxiety by just staying calm. You cannot recover from depression by just being positive. You cannot recover from anorexia by just eating more. If mental illnesses were that simple, we wouldn't be struggling in the first place. End quote. Mr. Speaker, a pleasant good afternoon. Lunatic, bad head, crazy, they need to be locked up. These are just a few common views of mental illnesses. Stigma and prejudice are still where most people get their knowledge of mental health. The psychological issues facing the nation are swept into the background behind heart diseases, cancer, and infectious diseases. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we as the public become properly informed on the effects that these stigmas can have on our young people. Mr. Speaker, fear and lack of information are also contributing factors to this cycle. Efforts in educating the public will take time. However, Mr. Speaker, it will bring awareness to improving these circumstances. To begin with, children and teens are constantly changing. They grow up quickly, and before you know it, your giggly, energetic toddler is a teenager who sleeps until noon. Mr. Speaker, as we grow, it's normal to change as we learn new things and our body transform into our adult selves. But with all these changes going on, how can we tell which changes are normal? At what point should we start worrying that our child's tantrum or teenager's mood swings are more than just growing pains? Mr. Speaker, it can be hard to tell. The truth is, for many young people, these sudden changes aren't just a part of growing up. They are symptoms of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, mental illnesses, if not treated early, can be destructive enough to a child's normal development that it can affect them for the rest of their lives. Mental illnesses such as substance abuse, depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anorexia, and schizophrenia all affect young people of this Bahama land. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, mental health problems in children are linked to educational failure, which in turn is associated with increased rates of psychiatric disorder. Mr. Speaker, this is emerging evidence for school-based interventions and potentially safe and effective treatments for improving the mental health of children and young people. Mr. Speaker, school-based intervention programs can be challenging to deliver, but in order to keep them going in a long term, school engagement and commitment is essential. Prevention and mental health promotion programs and activities can be effectively implemented by teachers and can have a significant impact on psychosocial and academic performance. It's also worth noting that some preventative intervention may be more effective when delivered by teachers. Also, Mr. Speaker, the World Health Organization highlights that there is a severe shortage worldwide of qualified and skilled experts to deal with mental health needs. It has, however, implemented a plan to assist its mental health gap action program. The program provides technical assistance to low and middle income countries to train their general doctors, nurses, and health workers to identify and treat priority disorders. Mr. Speaker, this is a program that the Bahamas ought to take full advantage of.
Member from Michael, your time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
As many chair wishes to recognize the honourable member for Central and South Abaco.
Mr. Speaker, mental illness is best defined by Mayo Clinic to a wide range of mental health conditions or disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. Mr. Speaker, there are over 200 types of mental illnesses and 5 main categories of mental illness. According to the World Health Organization, 14% of the global burden disease is attributed to mental, substance use disorders, and neurological. Experts also have suggested that approximately 20% of the world's children and adolescents have mental disorders, and half of mental disorders begins before the age of 14. Mr. Speaker, I believe we can promote mental illness through church-based, school-based, and community-based. Mr. Speaker, the church is now a place where help and guidance is hard to be found. Mr. Speaker, the church is no longer bothered to help persons who suffer from mental illnesses because they claim that these persons are demon-possessed. But Mr. Speaker, is that the church? But Mr. Speaker, should that be the case? And as Christians, isn't that not our goal to help those persons? So why the judging and criticizing? Why can we not help our brother who's in need? Because we are saying we are Christians. What is Christ like? But Mr. Speaker, it is a disgrace when a pastor judges me before he can also help me. Mr. Speaker, so why can't we start creating positive and welcoming environments that can help them to have a bond with us so we can help them in any way possible, Mr. Speaker? We can also do this through the church base by helping a dysfunctional family who is in need. And this is the job of the church, to help more and judge less, Mr. Speaker. We can also promote mental illness in the schools, because that is where it all begins. The schools are the places where the bullying and peer pressure takes place. And the children comes back home being depressed because they are being bullied each and every day. And they have no one to talk to, Mr. Speaker. So this is the reason why it will be best to do it school-based. At schools, we can promote mental illness through mental awareness clubs that can teach the students on how to help someone who is suffering from this disease, and it can also provide information about the topic. And we can also host mental health festivals that can help persons who are suffering from this disease to have funds to purchase treatments. We can also train the staff, including teachers and guidance counselors, so they can know how to help with this disease that is taking over our youth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one negative word can cause someone to take their own life away. And just one positive word somebody needs, and it changed their whole day, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do agree that the school needs to host more seminars on this topic, because we as Bahamian people We need to be alerted, Mr. Speaker, on this illness. Finally, we can do this using the community. In the community, we can host events such as mental illness ball programs that can help persons to purchase treatments, Mr. Speaker. We can also hold screening events to get the community to get involved. Youth are affected by mental illness through self-harming, bullying, peer pressure, and suicide. My constituency can create many standalone rehabilitation centers, not only in the Abacos, but also in the Family Islands. We can create research centers and make sure that every person has a voice, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as I take my seat, I am reminded that the 16th President of the United States of America, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, was one who overcame the illness of mental disorder. And this proves to me, Mr. Speaker, if he could have reached that high office, there should be nobody that we should downgrade. We should help our youth, Mr. Speaker, as one nation and as one body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Engliston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Don't give me advice on my illness. Don't tell me I take too many meds. Don't tell me it could be worse, and do not compare me to someone else. You see, Mr. Speaker, these are the cries of our citizens who dreadfully suffer from mental illnesses. Stigmatization and social exclusion of the mentally ill has become the order of the day. Sound the alarm, Mr. Speaker. It is time to tread forward in a new direction. Mr. Speaker, quite enthusiastically, I address this sagacious body on behalf of the resilient people of Angliston as we seek to repair the socially tattered fabric surrounding mental illness in our country. Permit me at this time to elaborate on the unethical parity that exists as a result of the stigmas associated with mental illness. Mr. Speaker, gone are the days where social inclusion was not defined by an individual's state of mind. Today, persons are challenged by the stigmas that result from misconceptions about mental illness. Social media has become a platform for persons to ridicule those with disabilities. The public's reaction to people with mental illnesses have become a melting pot of unsavory attributes. And if it wasn't unfortunate enough, Mr. Speaker, the World Psychiatric Association reports that there are incidences where mentally ill persons have even prejudiced themselves. Research conducted by clinical psychiatrist Hardin et al. Revealed that suicide is still among the 3 most common causes of death in youth, and the numbers of suicide in young men has risen steadily over the last 2 decades, while attempted suicides have increased among the girls. Up to 90% of young people who commit suicide have evidence of serious mental problems, in particular depression, while self-harm and eating disorders are a growing problem. Mr. Speaker, with the right interventions in place, these issues shall come to pass. Mr. Speaker, I envision myself and all of the upstanding individuals across the length and breadth of the Bahamas working peaceably to use social media as an avenue to combat this issue of stigmatization. Noted clinical professor Dr. Bethany Cox submits that as an intervention, priming positive social interactions is relatively straightforward and can easily be administered via email, where it takes approximately 2 minutes a day to complete. This intervention may be most useful in short term, as the effect on well-being was small and participants showed signs of habituation by 6 weeks. Hence, Mr. Speaker, I propose that increasing the salience of positive social interactions via social media may be most useful for individuals to commit to more time to an intervention. Mr. Speaker, as an aspiring educator, I believe that schools have an important role to play in cognitive development and academic achievement and social development. These aspects of learning are inextricably linked considering the philosophical orientations and educational psychology that educators have been exposed to. The International Journal of Mental Health states that 44% of children with emotional disorders were behind in their overall educational attainment. 43% missed at least 5 days in the previous term, and 12% were excluded. These rates are even higher for children with recognized behavioral problems. Mr. Speaker, I propose that teachers and respective education faculty members participate in more professional development opportunities to increasingly educate them on how to support them in these curricular domains.
Thank you, Member Bank. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great people of Exuma, Exuma Keys, and Ragged Island. I am most grateful for the opportunity to voice my concerns on the pressing issue of mental illness within adolescents in this great Bahama land. I wish to commence this resolution on the factor of mental illness in the Bahamas is one that is severe. I wish people could understand that this brain is the most important organ of the body. Just because you can't see mental illness like you can see a broken bone doesn't mean that it is detrimental or devastating to a family or an individual. End quote by Demi Lovato. One's first thought when discussing mental illness might lead to point fingers at the Ministry of Health and the ways that they should be ensuring that the public is well notified on the issues of mental illness. However, this here, Mr. Speaker, is an issue that is multi-sectorial. We are all here to bridge the gap and to make known that this illness is one that needs haste response. Studies suggest that mental health conditions in the Caribbean are very rampant and scary because only few people can acknowledge that they have a problem or have the necessary conditions to seek medical help. Sufferers of mental illness are not only prisoners of misconception and alienation, but also of poverty and discrimination. Statistics confirm that 60% of mental health patients in the Caribbean are less likely to have received mental health treatment or counseling. Poverty, instability, and discrimination are the leading risks for depression. Mr. Speaker, I walk around my school day after day, and I look at the numerous amounts of students that are suffering from this silent epidemic. It touches me when you ask a child if everything is okay, and they burst into tears with no explanation. Mr. Speaker, it is heart-wrenching because the young people of the Bahamas are suffering, and they have no idea that they are suffering from mental illness. For sure, the Bahamas government must now begin to expand the networks like peer counseling and support groups to aid in the treatment of this mental disorder. The Bahamas is in dire need of mental health care workers as depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses are on the rise. Who do I call if I'm on the edge and I'm a tweak away from taking my life? Who do I call, Mr. Speaker? Where do I go, Mr. Speaker, to seek help? Who do I look to if I see signs of a close friend that is pricelessly self-harming themselves? These are a few questions of one who is suffering or who has a friend of a loved one who is suffering. Mr. Speaker, this is the time for us to be vocal. The young people of this country are suffering from these mental illnesses, and we have to take a stance. A study conducted in Africa is one of the initiatives that has worked, including traditional healers, faith healers, and community health workers, to help detect mental illness. In pilots, about 1,600 people were referred to clinics. 500 of them were diagnosed with mental illness. I believe the same initiative also can be effective here in the Bahamas. In Africa, they established these foundations throughout the country that just does not cater to those who suffer from mental illness, but has been capped as a youth center to receive counsel, tutoring, and empowerment. Why not take the same approach here in the Bahamas? Mr. Speaker, We first need to create awareness through campaigns of social media platforms, Bahamian influencers, and music, just to name a few. Begin to conduct an annual drive or march to collect donations towards the cause and invite Bahamian influencers and entertainers to be a part of bringing about awareness. We advertise here in the country signs on teenage pregnancy, getting tested for sexual diseases, saying no to drugs. But how about we put signs up pertaining to silence because of the stigma, pain because of the pressure, cultivating for the cure? This is a community effort that can be made to diminish the stigma of mental illness and bring persons to grips of their awareness. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this is the way forward to advocate for this illness and to educate our Bahamian people. I once again would love to thank the fine people of Exuma and Ragged Island for making me their voice here today. I am most humble and gracious. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the member for Carmichael.
A joke to some and a dreadful reality to others. How do we take the lives of our very own Bahamian people so lightly? Mental illness is now the game changer of life. Mr. Speaker, as I stand in this prestigious house today with the esteemed pleasure as I speak on behalf of the worthy people of Carmichael. Mr. Speaker, there are problems that affect mental illness awareness that must be addressed. These problems include the ongoing stigma of persons with mental illness, the lack of education and awareness of mental disease, community-based support and maintenance programs, and school-based interventions through teaching and training. Mr. Speaker, on October 10, 2018, we celebrated World Mental Health Day, which, however, went unnoticed by many. Mr. Speaker, why have we allowed such major issues to go untouched for so long? Mental illness is taken as a minor controversy compared to other illnesses faced by our young Bahamian people today. Some of these persons may possibly be our very own family members and friends. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, there are always solutions to help solve a problem. Mr. Speaker, it is imperative that we implement the necessary avenues and solutions that will benefit our nation long term. Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by saying that it all starts within our homes and our communities. Our first avenue for intervention would be implementing community-based events centered around mental illness in our young people. We need more community-based facilities where non-medical volunteers can be trained to properly assist these individuals so that they do not feel ostracized from the general community. Mr. Speaker, this venture will play a tremendous role in helping to assist persons with mental illnesses and provide them with the necessary treatments while giving persons in the community a sense of purpose. Correspondingly, Mr. Speaker, there should be a major youth organization also formed by the youth of our nation entitled the Bahamas Youth Mental Illness Foundation. This organization will provide support and counseling for persons with mental illnesses under the age of 25. Under this organization, activities will be held providing awareness to the young people in the communities. These activities will consist of educational speech competitions, fun-run walks, church services, bake sales, and more. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this resolution will come to pass in aid of our young people facing these problems, along with others who are not yet facing the full effects of mental illness, but can rather combat it before this vile illness gradually gains more control over the lives of our young people. I am confident that after such solutions are manifested, the stigma will be removed and persons will feel more competent in speaking up about the challenges they are facing, along with being provided with the necessary resources previously mentioned. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I believe that the solutions for intervention have been respectfully presented in this 17th session of Youth Parliament and should be conveyed and acknowledged by the House. As I believe in my Bahamian people, I believe in their health and strength. I believe that the Bahamian people are essential to the growth and prosperity of our nation. Mr. Speaker, these matters taking place in our nation should not go unidentified, but rather acknowledged. I stand firmly on my beliefs as I represent the gracious people of Carmichael. I believe that we are one people united in love and service. Mr. Speaker, I believe in the prosperity of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Minnie, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Garden Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Again, it is indeed a blessing and a joy to represent my dynamic constituents of Garden Hills. The greatest riches in this world you can have is a peace of mind. I'm not a big fan of rap, Mr. Speaker, but every time I listen to it, I play the same songs over and over from the late Tupac Shakur, died in September of 1996 at the age of 25. And every time I hear this line, it reminds me of the days in Youth Society where he says, "No one knows my struggle. They only see the trouble, not knowing it's hard to carry on when no one loves you." Oftentimes, as I sit and reflect on that line, I'm reminded of how we as a society generally look down on people, and most importantly, youth, in the eyes of how we think they should be. I myself was a victim of stereotyping by a countless amount of officers who supposedly are my friends. He had to serve and protect me, but rather mistreated me all because of the stigma of the locks I no longer have on my head today. This debate to me is personal, Mr. Speaker. However, for time's sake, all I would say is thank God for a praying family. I made it through, and look at where I am today. However, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, there are others who can't say the same. Proverbs 22:6 tells us, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Mr. Speaker, we are a society quick to pass judgment, not realizing that youth are a product and reflection of their environment. We prefer to tear down each other rather than build them up. We prefer to laugh at someone's struggle rather than be that shoulder to cry on. And as of late, the social media takeover, we rather take pictures and videos to pass along the airwaves. We rather pass the pictures and videos along the airwaves rather than stepping in to see how we could be of a positive assistance, Mr. Speaker. I am sure we all heard the line before. There's a thin line between sanity and insanity, Mr. Speaker. In our day-to-day life, there are loads of smiles on the faces of people whom you'll be surprised to know are broken people. Mr. Speaker, mental health issue is a real problem. All around, the problem is often overlooked and taken for granted. Mental health issues, in the most part, start to develop from the adolescent stage. As a teen, very rarely do you have a say or a choice. So who they become? Are they really to blame? According to the World Health Organization, Mr. Speaker, more than 3,000 youths die every day from preventable causes, such as injuries and violence. The list goes on. Rebecca Theodore, caller writer from Washington, D.C., she says statistics confirm 60% of mental patients in the Caribbean are less likely to have mental health treatment or counseling. And by 2020, cases are to increase by 50% due to the aging population. Wow. What are we doing, and what are we going to do about this serious yet consistently overlooked illness? As it stands, Mr. Speaker, nothing should be higher than the law. People with this illness are actually protected by the Disability Act, but this does not happen. These youth are regular citizens of society and should be treated as such. If they are not, it should be dealt with accordingly by the law. Traditional youth organizations are focused on the problems rather than how they can assist, often being a next dictator in an already dictated life for the youth. To the governments and the school, education is the key. Now that family life is a mandatory subject, it's so vital that the staff has the absolutely skills necessary. They have to have the analytical skills to teach us to communicate effectively with the young people and their organizations across the various sectors. Building this capacity is critical. This class should require data collection and evaluation that shares with the guidance department, where a database is created for record keeping. To the church, I say this with the utmost respect. The church should be the place the youths want to go and run with open arms. When people are pleading for help, the first place they should want to come is into the house of God. Pastors, I urge you, embrace these people, hear their cries, but most importantly, help them and keep their business a secret. To society, what I want to tell you is be your brother's keeper. If you can help, do just that. It is more blessed to give than to receive. A simple gesture, compliment goes a long way. In closing, Mr. Speaker, life is mental. The way you think is the way you live. Today for me, tomorrow for you. When you point one finger, three comes back at you. Look down at nobody, Mr. Speaker, because we are all not past us until we there. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and may God continue to bless the entire Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
As many, Chair recognizes the honourable member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Mr. Speaker. If you would lend me your ears, allow me to share with you a story of one of my constituents. She cuts herself as a result of her insomnia-induced depression. As the blood oozes down her forearm, she longs for solitude and someone to confide in, without being stereotyped and labeled as crazy. At the young age of 16, happiness. She has none. Mental illnesses. She has many. This morning I rise on behalf of the superlative citizens residing in the even more spectacular constituency of Pine Ridge, located on the great island of Grand Bahama. Though these hardworking people may seem like they have it all together, one can never be certain because mental illness has no face. It does not respect, nor does mental illness discriminate. Mr. Speaker, it saddens me that we are also oblivious to the fact that these things that we take lightly can develop into something so great and detrimental. OCD, PTSD, ADHD, alcoholism, and that hit home for me. Depression, anxiety. Mr. Speaker, these are just some of the many mental illnesses that my constituents and the people of the Bahamas face daily. Mr. Speaker, as the influential and intellectual youth of the Bahamas, it is up to us to find and terminate the root of this problem. There is only one thing stopping us. There is no one specific reason for any of these. You go and ask 5 different people why they have depression, and you will get 5 different answers, if and only if you get an answer at all. And why would I say that? Because mental illness has been stereotyped as something only crazy people have. Mr. Speaker, if you are mentally ill, you are utterly unfit to be a functional member of society. Or at least that is what our ignorance would lead us to believe. The categorization of individuals who suffer from mental illness creates a barrier, crippling us from proper communication, adequate understanding, and appropriate diagnosis and treatment. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, be it resolved, and resolved it is, that the removing of the stigma from mental illness is one of the first steps towards the prevention of widespread, undetected, and untreated mental illness in young people. In the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. As youth directly at the forefront of change of this great nation, we need to become aware and educate others, because as well as ignorance is bliss, it is also destruction. As leaders, it is our duty to ensure our people are aware of the dangers and effects of this disease. Therefore, I strongly propose the implementation of this topic in the family life curriculum. This would inform not only those affected, but those who will affect others in the future, and eventually lead to the awareness of this epidemic. Though the birds, the bees, the curly-tailed lizards, or whatever is taught to our underage students is important to some, mental illness is vital to all. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that almost all of these problems can be traced back to finances, economic instability, society, or unhealthy human relations. Dr. Mike Neville said, it impacts how we feel. It impacts the productivity and balance of the workforce, and it causes mental illness, further the very fabric of society. Like my MP advised, we must recognize that this condition of mental illness is becoming more prominent in our society, and it must be treated as the disease it shows itself to be. Mr. Speaker, what are we doing now to help these people? What are we doing now to help my people, that 16-year-old girl? How can we help to remove the stigma from mental illness? There is no doubt that the efforts of the hardworking individuals in the dialogue are not progressive. However, more can be done. the ratio of psychologists to victims cannot suffice for the growing population of patients. Thus, we must employ more qualified individuals, equipped with knowledge and skills to treat and cure the affected parties. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, mental illness is not a laughing matter, and we must be our brother's keeper. These are just some ways in which we can eradicate, suppress, and evict the humiliation of mental illness from the minds of our natives, enabling us to move forward, upward, onward, and together. Thank you.
Ms. Minnie, the chair recognizes the member from Marco City.
You pray to God silently, asking that your mom doesn't walk in because you don't have the guts to tell your life giver that you simply don't want to live anymore. You reach for a razor and you cry harder with each slice. Increasingly frustrated, you cut deeper with a bigger blade and you hate yourself even more. There in the bathtub, you slip into the darkness of ether and you fade away completely, only after your little sibling walks in wondering why you haven't come outside to play with them as usual. Mr. Speaker, we cannot have this vivid nightmare become another version of reality. I would like to express what an honor I have in representing the esteemed constituency of Marco City and aim to contribute to this discussion with unique interventions on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, have you ever heard or used the term beacon? Admittedly, the Bahamian connotation of this word accommodates the rather common view of this epidemic in our nation. Individuals with a form of mental illness must not be dehumanized. Our nation must mature to the point in understanding that microaggressions as such develop into macroaggressions, accounting for mass crime and suicidality rates which are high on the rise. Page 9 of the National Health Strategic Plan expresses that there is a lack of allied health professionals, which contributes to the bottlenecks in the system, becoming a barrier to the timely access of care and services. It states further that there is a need for sufficient skilled workers as well. Per suggested in my contribution during the morning session, the Bahamas Youth Employment Initiative would be the perfect ground for facilitating the expansion of the mental health workforce. Young Bahamians would again engage in simultaneous work and schooling within the 350 programs to be offered in order to become the professional and well-trained allied health workers. Marco City agrees with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration that delivery of safe, effective, and high-quality coordinated care is dependent on workforce competencies. Marco City strongly believes that Bahamians must know how to readily respond to mental health crises and properly intervene. We must also take responsibility in gathering the adequate data we need from each constituency to be integrated into larger governmental frameworks, such as the National Health Strategic Plan, in order to make it as accurate, reliable, and clear as possible. And to achieve this, Marco City implores the wider use of Health Information Technology, or HIT. As it stands, our nation has lagged behind in producing adequate records in general, and Marco City is warning that we cannot allow the health sector to be affected by this. I am certain that our population will become properly engaged in mental illness treatment once the transition to electronic health records and even online psychotherapies is made. As a nation, we must embrace the rapid advancements in IT and AI in order to design and construct a transparent health database in which accessibility and availability of patient files are increased, while also acting as a helpful tool for the expanded workforce so that they stay abreast of recent developments and training benefits also. By and large, we must look at the issue of mental illness from an internal angle and focus on educating the Bahamian public on this 21st century epidemic. We must collect the relevant data relating to health and amend existing legislation such as the National Strategic Plan and expand the mental health workforce via the BYEI, which will produce the healthcare professionals this nation needs in order to eradicate the stigma of mental illness and properly support its victims. In conclusion, it is up to us to decide whether or not this will be a hit or a miss. And with this, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the member for Bain and Grantstown.
Thank you once again, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Bain and Grantstown constituency. As a citizen, I have been given fundamental rights to speak with freedom of expression and conscience, and I do so with all truth. Mental illness, according to the World Health Organization, is an ailment that are based on one's thinking, feelings, or moods. Mental illness can affect men, women, and children equally. In such ways as depression, autism, bipolar, and so on. Mr. Speaker, a primary care center here at the Capitol faced a problem, which was reported that I leave is entirely anonymous. I had a chance to volunteer there for a few months and was very observant. Mr. Speaker, 2 ill mental children suffered by negligence. On one occasion, a child was left unmonitored as a worker stepped out from the room leaving the child alone. The child had autism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the child was left alone and was found dead at the worker's return. On another occasion, Mr. Speaker, children were left alone in the room again as the worker proceeded out the room. An iron was left on, and a curious child taking the iron, burning another child with it, Mr. Speaker. Dealing with children with such illnesses should not be left alone. But because the stigma is still at base, as you can see, Mr. Speaker, something has to be done. Mr. Speaker, the Disability Act of the Bahamas assures us that Adapted Services implements tools of qualified technicians. And I believe it is safe to say, Mr. Speaker, that if this act exhibits such feasible solution, and that the same act also informs us about caregivers, but who are not certified in skills and awareness on mental illness in primary care units such as foster homes and geriatric care centers for the aged. The stigma cannot be moved unless one knows about what they are catering or administering to, Mr. Speaker. The stigma will remain with no knowledge of such an illness. As the resolution states, advance on teaching and training. Well, Mr. Speaker, this is my proposal for the stigma to be removed. Allow Social Services, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Education to give interventions on mental illness, as well as skill training to certify all caregivers and administrators that are in the healthcare profession under these primary care units. PHA has now introduced a program that gives licensing to anyone who wishes to become patient support. This gives vital skills on bedside care for the mental ill. Such certification to our people will bring pathways to competency in the level of aiding to mental ill people, removing the stigma, and also increasing wage pay for workers. Mr. Speaker, 52(1) of the Constitution states, as I close, Parliament makes laws for peace, order, and good, and I speak with surety that this propaganda be considered to be invoked as change to our primary care sectors that shall surely bring order with good and peace. So I move. Thank you.
Many. The chair recognizes the member for Acklands.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Albert Einstein once said, and I quote, "Everyone is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid," end quote. Mr. Speaker, allow me to take you back to October 1st, 2015, a date that the constituents of the island of Acklands will never forget. Hurricane Joaquin, a Category 4 hurricane, was hungry and sought to devour the southern islands. Joaquin left the Acklands Islanders stuck in their houses for days with no sense of communication, electricity, and for some, food. After Joaquin's job was complete, my island was left desolate. And because of this, students moved, houses were lost, and memories of one's life flashing before their eyes can never be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask, What precautions did the leaders of the Bahamas take to combat the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of the wonderful people of the island of Auckland? Mr. Speaker, as I did my research, I learned that there is a Disability Act. As I read the act, I came to the understanding that this document speaks to those that suffer from physical impairments. At first discovery and growing up in a community where these illnesses were prevalent, I was disturbed. I dug some more and finally came across the Equality Act of 2010, which according to mind.org.uk is, quote, the law that protects you from discrimination and gives you the right to challenge it, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I asked myself, what has the Bahamian government, past and present, done to help rectify this solution and give those who couldn't speak a voice? I gathered a few things, Mr. Speaker. One, the laws of the Bahamas on mental health speak to admittance and release from the hospital. 2, job exemptions, and 3, guardianship and property. Chapter 230 of the Statute Law of the Bahamas states that the purpose of the Mental Health Act is to make fresh provision for the care and treatment of mentally disordered persons and with respect to their property, commenced July 28, 1969. Mr. Speaker, it's 2018. We automatically assume that the only mental health issues are circled around mental retardation, when in actuality there is depression, anxiety, stress, and loneliness, just to name a few. These are being hidden under the covers, stepped over, and played blind bottomers too. Mr. Speaker, this is a national epidemic. I reiterate that the starter age of half of all mental illness is 14 years old. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the schools, the teachers, the parents, what are we doing to put an end to or decrease the rate of teenagers and adolescents enduring agony and distress because of mental health issues? Are we taking the time to form programs that foster positive growth and a relationship for youth to feel safe and comfortable expressing themselves? Or are we putting them in classrooms and forcing fish to climb trees? Forcing them to look, act, speak, and think alike. And if they fail to do so, we condemn them, we judge them, and we deem them to hell. Mr. Speaker, disagreeing with the honorable member from Central and South Abaco, I'd now like to call on the parents because it starts at home. And if there is no way of expressing yourself at home, where are you going to feel comfortable?
Thank you, Member Falklands.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
As many, the Chair recognizes the member for Central and South, Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here with pride representing my constituents of Central Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, an ideal that is old as time itself, one that has been introduced to both young and old. Practice makes perfect. Although some may argue that perfection in many cases is left unseen, I am here to resolve that if at least not perfection, practice should make sense. Practice sets precedent. Mr. Speaker, why am I talking about practice? Simple. Practice is what has brought us here today, and practice is what will take us further beyond our norm to the reform which we seek. The disregard for mental health issues in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas has been practiced and taught not within our classrooms, but by example to this nation's sons and daughters. We've all experienced delightful moments at the expense of some random Bahamian battling a mental illness. As children, we heard our parents talk and snicker when they got the chance to see a crazy person on the street acting out. Today, we as young people alike are so generous with sharing videos and memes on social media platforms of persons suffering some type of mental illness for our own amusement. Mr. Speaker, why is it funny that a man whose identity is buried way beneath his insecurities, he arises every day not knowing which voice or which stronghold will demand his attention for that day? Mr. Speaker, why is it funny of a young lady dancing in an open space to music that no one else can hear?
Because of this scorn and disdain, we have a great score of young people afraid, Mr. Speaker, to speak out of the dark issues that bombard their minds every single day. They're ashamed of being labeled, ashamed of being targeted and scoffed at. Ladies and gentlemen, mental illness is not a light matter. The stigma has to go. I discovered through my research that we miss major opportunities to evaluate and encourage mental wellness in our communities during a particular traumatic experience. Right now, I would like to applaud organizers in Grand Bahama who designed a similar program in the form of post-crisis management seminar after the Hurricane Matthew in 2016. Mr. Speaker, we ought to treat mental illness with the same importance of health, of cancer, of diabetes, and of heart disease. Education and awareness are necessary to bring some type of normalcy to this problem. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my fellow parliamentarian. General public education is necessary. This should be done at every school level. We must educate both young and old to detect mental illnesses, the signs. We need to implement programs within our school systems to encourage social support and provide mental health testing similar to vaccination. We need to encourage and incentivize tertiary education programs at the University of the Bahamas, focusing on mental health care specifically. Mr. Speaker, it is disheartening to know that my island, Grand Bahama, does not have a large-scale facility. We are subject to the acute dire ward that they have to transport everyone to the nation's capital to be treated. Mrs. In conclusion, I think that we need to advocate for change because we need to invest in our young people now. Their experiences of advocacy is successful when people are informed about their issues, but also when they are asked to become a part of the solution. Everything about our Bahamian motto speaks to progression. Forward, upward, onward, together. As youth at the forefront of change, if we do not push to make the difference now, our children would take the same seats and discuss the same problems that we are discussing today. And that, Mr. Speaker, is insanity. Thank you.
As many, the chair recognizes the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to rise on behalf of the wonderfully resilient constituents of Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Mr. Speaker, the majority of persons that has a mental illness are objected to challenges in double measures. Mental illness has the potential to impact every facet of an individual's life as well as the lives of those around them. Firstly, to suppress the stigma, we must acknowledge the fact that there is a need to promote education and awareness of the various mental illnesses affecting young people. Some of these mental illnesses include anxiety, ADHD, depression, bipolar, and the most dangerous of them all, suicide. Mental health is a critical worldwide issue. Stigma and mental health literacy plays an important role in the tragic stories of individuals with mental illness. These young individuals are so often stigmatized, which results in them suffering adverse consequences such as social isolation, limited life chances, and making work and schooling very strenuous. Therefore, we must come together and work. Therefore, we must come together and educate the young and the old. If this continues and persons are left undetected and untreated, many would not be able to lead a fulfilling lifestyle. This brings us to the second solution. We need to enforce school-based interventions through the act of teaching and training. Early identification and effective intervention is key to successfully treating these illnesses. It is common for adolescents to fail their peers and school teachers. Therefore, school plays a key role in a child's development from peer relationships, social interactions, to academics, cognitive progress, and physical and moral development. Many teachers are not trained professionally to deal with these students that are suffering from mental illnesses and often get frustrated with those that are amongst them. This increases the rate of students leaving school with an unrecognized illness. It is true that many don't show signs and are usually the happiest persons to be around. We often come across them in our daily routines.
I myself have encountered a few persons that are victims. In addition, prevention programs help to reduce the rate of young people not finishing school and acquiring skills to help with their daily activities. We must bring the issue of mental illness out into the light, out of the shadow, and deal with it. Sometimes taking the small steps helps to save a life. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Barnabas.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing me to present in this honorable house of assembly. Mr. Speaker, I stand here representing the extraordinary and gracious constituents of St. Barnabas. Mr. Speaker, it pains my heart to address this topic in this honorable house of assembly today. But Mr. Speaker, we have a very serious problem in this country among our young people. Mr. Speaker, it is a problem which I don't think that we as a government have paid much attention to. And Mr. Speaker, I feel that the country overall has turned a blind eye to this malignant, growing, and I must say, vexing problem. However, Mr. Speaker, the time has come when we can no longer ignore it. We can no longer pretend that it's non-existent, when every day the result of it is staring us in the face. No, Mr. Speaker, the time is now to admit that we have far too many unstable people in our midst. The time is now that we examine our consciences, that we stop running away from the truth, and that we say enough is enough. Mr. Speaker, the World Health Organization has noted that 16% of the global burden of disease and injury in the people aged 16 to 19 stems from mental health conditions. The World Health Organization noted further that depression is one of the leading causes of illness and disability among our adolescents, and that suicide is the leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. When we look at the World Health Organization report, Mr. Speaker, we see that half of all mental health conditions start by the age of 14, but most are undetected. Mr. Speaker, the consequences of not addressing these situations extend to adulthood, impairing both physical and mental health and limiting opportunities for people to lead fulfilling adult lives. With a population of fewer than 400,000 people, Mr. Speaker, these figures for the Bahamas would be totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable, sir. And so, Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to bury our heads in our beautiful white and pink sand and pretend that what is happening in the global atmosphere is not happening here. For the most part, mental illness carries a stigma. And whether we want to admit it or not, we see those so afflicted as odd. Some are even labeled as being crazy. The people, Mr. Speaker, tend to retreat within themselves, try to shut the world out. Mr. Speaker, there are many young people today, and older people too, who immerse themselves in social media. They are always on their phones, and we really don't pay attention except to say these children are always on the phone. That, however, is not because they enjoy being on the phone, but that is their escape. That is how they say, don't bother me, I'm busy.
Thank you, Member for St. Barnabas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May God bless the country.
As many, Chair recognizes the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is hidden, yet it is displayed. It doesn't have a definite shape or size, but it matters. It's something that cannot be stopped, but it can be controlled. It is mental illness, also known as the silent epidemic. Mr. Speaker, good afternoon. It is indeed an honor to stand here in this noble house on behalf of the great West Grand Bahama and Bimini. The disease known as mental illness is a serious issue that has been affecting people worldwide, and the same is true for the Bahamas. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines mental illness as a broad range of medical conditions that result in a person's inability to think normally, thereby affecting one's daily behavior, emotions, and interactions.
Speaking on behalf of Grand Bahama Mental Health Committee, both Dr. R. Reddy and Dr. Jane Turnquest pointed out that mental health issues can arise from emotional problems, bipolar depression, and from drug abuse. But there are many other external factors that contribute to mental illnesses, such as poverty, instability, and discrimination, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, to quote forensic psychiatrist Dr. Mike Neville, and as the honorable member of Michael said, lunatic, bad head, crazy, they need to be locked up are still pretty common views of mental illness in the Bahamas, while stigma and prejudice are still where most people get their knowledge of mental health. In his opinion, the psychological issues facing the nation are swept into the background. Left untreated, misunderstood, and unable to cope with their struggles, those who are mentally ill are often driven to the brink of despair with the devastating consequences of suicide and attempted suicide. June 12, 2018, death of a 45-year-old male of West Grand Bahama, found by his teenage daughter. September 17, 2018, the Grand Bahama community and family in a state of mourning over suicide, a beloved former social worker, which occurred in the Malibu Reef. Mr. Speaker, this one thing is clear. Mental illness can affect anyone at any time, regardless of gender, educational, or social background. Like any other disease, early detection, intervention, or treatment beginning from childhood is key to an effective approach. Finally, in the words of Sharon Turner, my hope is that the Bahamians will get the facts about suicide and mental illness and get past their prejudice and preconceived notions. And my prayer is that together as a nation, we can begin to change the way we treat others and the way we treat ourselves, and that we will place the focus on mental health that is desperately needed in our country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Minnie. Chair recognizes the member of Parliament for Marathon.
Speaker, I thank the Almighty God for giving me the strength and courage to represent the ambitious residents of Marathon during the 17th session of Youth Parliament. Mr. Speaker, according to the resolution brought before this House, the global trend of mental illness is increasing among adolescents. The rise of mental illness leads to a high rate of suicide for adolescents between the ages of 15 and 19. This trending phenomenon is unacceptable, and is definitely unacceptable for the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The President Minister of Health said, and I quote, "Here in the Bahamas, the all too common sight of persons affected by substance abuse disorders, neurological conditions, or mental health problems, or living in conditions of homelessness, poverty, and desperate want, serve as a clear evidence of the need to focus national attention on mental health issues and mental health services." As of 2002, an estimated 450 million people worldwide are living with mental illness. These illnesses include, but are not limited to, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and even autism. Bahamians affected by mental illness are vulnerable to their quality of life being decimated. The mentally ill community has difficulties gaining education, social problems, abuse, and are at a high risk for poverty. Mr. Speaker, as stated in the resolution, the World Health Organization published a document in 2017 called the Global Accelerated Action for the Health of Adolescents. In the foreword of this document, it states, and I quote, "For years, the unique health issues associated with adolescents have been little understood or in some cases ignored," end quote. It is unfortunate that in the Bahamas, this statement is true. We have ignored that there is a lack of psychiatric facilities in the Bahamas. Agreeing with the honorable member for Long Island, the Sanders Rehabilitation Center is the only government-owned and operated psychiatric and geriatric and substance abuse hospital in the Bahamas, but is located on the island of Providence. Mr. Speaker, what about our Family Islanders? On numerous occasions, members of the Family Islands are neglected on these issues and suffer because of it. It is a prerequisite that there is a decentralization plan to provide assistance to residents of the Family Island in order to sternly address mental illness in the Bahamas. Whether it is placing a facility of its kind in all of the major Family Islands or ensuring that there is a trained personnel stationed at clinics to provide assistance to residents with mental problems. Mr. Speaker, There's a necessity for more schools that aim to educate members of the mentally ill community. Persons who are educated are equipped to find remedial employment. We must not segregate members of this community. I believe in a quote by former U.S. Senator Bill Bradley, and it states that leadership is unlocking people's potential to become. Mr. Speaker, before I close my contribution to this resolution, the members of this session have given substantial ideas to the resolution, but education, prevention, and fruition are the keys to understand and resolve mental illness in the Bahamas.
Thank you, Member for Marathon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many, Chair recognizes the member for Pinewood.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. Mr. Speaker, I rise before this intellectual body of youth at the forefront of change and representation of youth here, there, and everywhere, as well as I rise with respect to the honorable people of Pinewood, whom I hold near and dear to my heart. I also address this erudite body on behalf of those fighting the good fight in the battle against breast cancer, and those youth of the Bahamas rejected and overlooked in the constant suffering from mental illness within this here Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I ask for your indulgence of this honorable House as I share the story of Vanessa Richards, a single mother suffering from depression. On June 4th of 2018, Ms. Richards had called the supervisor and explained to him that she needed a day because of her mental illness. Our boss then replied, and I quote, "That's fine, and when you get over it, you need to look for a new job too. Goodbye." With that being said, Mr. Speaker, for far too long, the stigma placed on those suffering from mental illness has been ingrained into the very fiber of our culture and is unacceptable and must be eradicated by all means necessary, making it seem as if mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder are just illnesses you overcome in the late night hours. For far too long, this has been the thinking of the Bahamian people. But honorable members, the time has come. The time to eradicate and suppress the stigma placed on mental illness, not just in New Providence, but on a national level. Because Bahamians from Freeport in the north to Inagua in the south all suffer from mental illness, this dreadful disease. Not only is the presence of mental illness increasing, Mr. Speaker, but the horrifying part is the increase is coming in our youth of our nation, Mr. Speaker. According to the World Health Organization, half of mental illness begins by age 14, and most cases go undetected and untreated. Undetected and untreated. Mr. Speaker, gone must be those days in this Bahamian society. Mr. Speaker, permit me to say that the treatment towards mental illness in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is what you would consider inadequate, incomplete, and ineffective. We must tend to mental illness just as we would fight in the cause for AIDS and rally in support of breast cancer. The same attitude should be displayed in the case of mental illness among youth. Mr. Speaker, being a youth at the forefront of change, I find no need in stating problems. Yes, we know that there's a stigma placed on mental illness, but how are we now going to solve this issue? And with that being said, I propose to you today, honorable members, in conjunction with the Ministries of Health, Education, Social Services, and Ministry of Youth, a 4-step plan to nationally eradicate the stigma placed on mental illness. Because mental illness is a cross-cutting issue, so it would take a few ministries to bring about the needed change. Just as it takes a village to raise a child, Mr. Speaker, it takes a village to save that same child. And so step 1, educate. We must educate the public that mental illness is a serious illness. We must make the Bahamian people more aware that some of us actually do suffer from this disease. We can't fight a disease that people are not aware of, so awareness is key. Make persons aware of the hotline, symptoms, and the signs And once we would have educated, we then diagnose. Diagnosing mental illness is a critical issue in this country, Mr. Speaker. We must equip and train health professionals to properly diagnose those youth in suffering. The longer mental illness goes untreated, it becomes more of a threat to society. And after we would have diagnosed, Mr. Speaker, we now begin to treat. So step 3, treating. Treating the illness is prime to not only eradicating the stigma, but it's crucial to eradicating mental illness altogether. And after diagnosing, Mr. Speaker, step 4, we fight. We fight until the people realize that mental illness among youth is a serious issue that needs the support and attention of this entire nation. Mr. Speaker, the youth of this nation are crying, and those who ain't crying dying, in desperate attempts for help from their people. But that ends today, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say to the Bahamian people, hit it with the left, hit it with the right. We have to knock the stigma out like Fight Night. And after today, we move forward to abolish and destroy the stigmas placed on mental illness. Furthermore, it must happen as a nation, because united we stand and divided we fall. I'm reminded of the words of a wise man who once said, the wealth of a nation, Mr. Speaker, is the health of a nation. And so to make this nation a wealthy nation, we must make this nation a healthy one by removing the stigma through educating, diagnosing, treating, and fighting. And once that's done, it will certainly be a glad day, Mr. Speaker, a wonderful day, a glad day, a glorious day. There with all the holy angels and loved ones to stay, Mr. Speaker, that will be a glad reunion day. May God bless the people of Pinewood, and may God bless this Commonwealth of the Bahamas from this day on, Mr. Speaker.
As many, Chair recognizes the Member of Parliament for Nassau Village.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I submit to you that some individuals are more than their indecisive thinking, more than their seemingly shy attitude, that little boy is not a disgusting person, that Shani doesn't really mean to snap at her peers and exude anger. She didn't really mean to push that boy down the stairs. The young 24-year-old boy, he isn't really drunk. That's his first drink, he said. It's 10 a.m., but yeah, it's 12 somewhere. She wasn't really being disobedient. No, she didn't listen to her teacher, but it's because her teacher's just stupid. The young man's grades are bad, but he said that it's his best. She doesn't really jump in fear when people raise their hands when they're near to her. It's just a game they play. These lines you see on her hand, that's just a mark from her wristband, she said. She's okay. She's really okay. You see, Mr. Speaker, they are not okay. They are not okay. But they cannot tell you that in fear of being judged. They won't audibly tell you that it's hard to make decisions because every one of their past ones seem to be wrong. They won't audibly tell you that they are afraid of people because people kept hurting them or making fun of them, or they just might figure it out and then make more fun of them. The boy she pushed down the stairs, he tried to touch her. She didn't tell you that. You really want to know why she said her teacher is stupid? Because she really believed the marks on her wristband, the marks on her hand were from her wristband, or she really doesn't care. Mr. Speaker, if you haven't already summed it up, the behaviors exuded there are general behaviors of people with mental illness. We already established that there is a stigma. So what do we do next? We must first educate not only our peers, but people that are in constant contact with these young individuals. This is inclusive of teachers, law enforcement officers, and our parents. Individuals that are in constant contact with people are to be equipped with identifying and then making necessary arrangements to have that individual evaluated and treated as necessary. The National Alliance on Mental Illness advised that the start of many mental health conditions most often occurs in adolescence. Half of the individuals living with mental illness experience onset by the age of 14. This number jumps to 75% by the age of 24. This is where training comes in. With the implementation of mental health illness into education classes like most of my parliamentarians suggested, I suggest health and family life. We will be able to submerge students and give them an understanding of what people affected by these illnesses may go through and how they can help by simply being a listening ear or disclosing the information to people that can assist. 20% of youth experience mental health disorders and less are treated for them. The Willamette Pratt School for Girls advised me that admitted residents do not undergo a psychological evaluation. These, along with counseling, are done on special occasions. It should be mandatory that everyone admitted into those schools forego an evaluation. The Department of Statistics reported that the leading causes of inpatient morbidity for patients under 25 years in 2012 was mental health and behavioral disorders due to use of cannabinoids, 39%. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker, as I diligently represent the constituents of Fort Charlotte, I rise to discuss the issue of mental illness, an issue that is deleteriously affecting children adolescents, and even all around the world, adults, and of course, here in the Bahamas. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I wish to delve into this stigma that is attached to a mental illness. Mr. Speaker, it ought to be noted that we are a country where physical illness is accepted. Physical illness is the norm. However, we also believe in most cases that physical illnesses are treatable. However, the mentally ill among us remain in the shadows because they are reviled and ostracized because of their mental condition that we do not deem as real. They are called crazy, they are called weird, and many other disparaging terms that fuel their state of mental illness and their state of oppression. I believe that this stigma creates a barrier to mental health care. This stigma manifests particularly in a phenomenon where we socially distance ourselves from those who are mentally ill. This stigma may potentially result in persons who are mentally challenged experiencing loneliness, but this stigma can also worsen the well-being of mentally ill people in various ways. This stigma on mental illness also complicates the care and resources available to people with mental illness. The eradication of this stigma matters because stigma embraces both prejudicial attitudes and discriminating behavior in individuals with mental health challenges, which results in social effects such as exclusion, poor social support, poor subjective quality of low life, and low self-esteem. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, this stigma also has adverse effects on treatment outcomes, which further prevents mentally ill persons from gaining full recovery from mental illnesses. These are consequential reasons as to why, Mr. Speaker, this stigma needs to be addressed. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe that in eradicating this stigma from mental illness, this needs to be stopped. And of course, I believe we would ameliorate mental health in the Bahamas by reducing this stigma and, of course, reducing the economic burden. As we combat against mental illness, we need to first acknowledge mental illness by what it is, an illness. Educational forums need to be held where mentally ill and even the wider public can be educated and informed on the many mental illnesses that are detrimentally affecting the lives of our people and how these illnesses can be treated so that victims can make headway to recovery. Not only should these forums be educational and didactic, but should be multifaceted, where we challenge the negative attitudes that persons express toward mentally ill persons. Within these forums, we can challenge the negative stereotypes, especially as they are portrayed in the mass media. It is also important that those at the forefront working with mentally ill persons are well educated on this issue themselves, so that they, too, are not biased toward those who are mentally ill among us. Training more of our physicians and workers across the medical field in mental health issues creates the possibility of integrating mental health screening in primary care settings. Another barrier that separates mentally ill people from proper health care is the fear of disclosing a mental health condition. Now, my fellow youth parliamentarians may argue that there is not an abundance of psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed and professional counselors, therapists, doctors, and so on in our country to provide health care and support for those suffering from mental illness. However, I say unwaveringly that even with an overflow of capable professionals to address this issue of mental illness, we will see no positive result if those suffering from mental illness do not make an intentional decision to seek help.
Thank you, Member for Port Charlotte.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
As many, Chair recognizes the member for Tall Pines.
Suicide, if you ever try to let go. You decide if you ever think I'll let you go. I'm sad and low. I am sad, I know. I am sure that I am not the only one who has noticed that Sad, a song by famous rapper XXXTentacion, has been the cry of our youth for months through their WhatsApp statuses. Mr. Speaker, I am the representative for the Tall Pines constituency, here dutifully informing you about all of the issues regarding the stigma of mental health disorders and ways we can resolve them. We are all vaguely reminded of the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I believe it takes a country to combat depression, anorexia, and bulimia. But before that, we as a country must realize that mental health issues do indeed exist. Mental health is defined as a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. In today's society, we all know that seeing is believing. Hence, we don't see mental health issues and we often disregard it and consider those who face these issues as crazy.
We are aware that mental health is real and exists because of the 2014 Disability Act that states that mental health disorders are considered disabilities. According to AmericaHealth.net, 1 in every 5 American teenagers face mental health issues. Statistics Bahamas state that 1 in every 4 Bahamians have mental disorders. Now that we have established that mental health issues do exist, we must destroy the taboos and stigmas surrounding it. My fellow leaders, men in particular, is it not taboo to admit amongst your peers that you have an eating disorder? Leaders, is it not embarrassing to admit that you are having suicidal thoughts? First, Mr. Speaker, in order to eliminate this taboo, we must change our words. For the youth, the change our country will make because we are the forefront of change. My fellow Bahamians, it is time we alter the way we speak and the way we think of those with mental health issues. Take away crazy and crazy hill. Encourage the use of words with positive vibes and words that exude, as the young folks say it, positive vibes. I know that you have called the woman screaming on your corner crazy, a crazy head and a lunatic. We, Mr. Speaker, we must stop. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, it is so important that we first realize that mental health issues do indeed exist, then destroy the stigma, next combat it by encouraging our youth to seek guidance and help, then through medication or simply talking about it. We must establish the above, and only then will our nation's cries cease. I am not crazy, Mr. Speaker. Am I to be blamed that the neurons inside of my brain don't work like how yours do? Hear our cry, Bahamas. Hear our cry. Wait, I take that back. Lock me up if need be, Mr. Speaker. I am crazy. I am crazy for change in our Bahamas society. Suicide! If you ever try to let us go. Suicide! You will kill us one day, you know. I am sad, I know. I am sad, I know. More suicide if we don't fix it. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you. The question is that the following resolution be agreed. Recognizing the World Health Organization observed World Mental Health Day on October 10th, and that mental health conditions account for 16% of the global burden of disease and injury in people aged 10 to 19 years. Globally, depression is one of the leading causes of illnesses and disability among adolescents. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. Be it resolved that removing the stigma from mental illness is one of the first steps toward the prevention of widespread, undetected, and untreated mental illness in young people. Open discussions in forums such as National Youth Parliament go a long way in shedding light on the need for increased education on the subject of mental illness and can provide avenues for further intervention. The members here assembled have discussed solutions for eradicating the stigma of mental illness on a national level by promoting education and awareness of the various mental illnesses affecting young people, advancing school-based interventions through teaching and training, and introducing community-based prevention programs targeted at vulnerable young people. Be it further resolved that in 2017, the World Health Organization published the Global Accelerated Action for the Health of Adolescents, which aims to assist governments in responding to the health needs of adolescents in their countries, including mental health. And that this National Youth Parliament has provided a response to this document, identifying policies, programs, and plans which ought to be undertaken by the Bahamas government. As many as are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. The resolution is being agreed. Further resolutions? The chair recognizes the member from Nassau Village.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House of Assembly at its rising do adjourn. Sani die.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that this House at its rising do adjourn sine die. As many as are in favor will remain seated, and those opposed will stand. This House stands adjourned sine die.
All right.